What does Mike think of Balaam's error, especially the geographical context?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure of what either Fern or Fernando means by the geographical context, but I'll say a few things. I don't know if I'll hit the mark here or not. On just generally Balaam's error. On one hand, we of course presume that Balaam, again, if we read the story, the biblical account of the story, that he sounds like he kind of didn't intend, to curse Israel, or there might be a little ambiguity there. From what certain passages say, he at least tried to curse Israel. Maybe that's a better way to put it. He's asked by Balak, to go out and curse the Israelites, and Balak hires this prophet Balaam, and he comes out, comes over and says, hey, I'm only going to, speak what the Lord, tells me to speak. And then he goes out and he tries, to utter a curse, but of course God doesn't let him do that, and he winds up, speaking an endorsement and blessing, and we know the story. You read the story though, and you wonder, well, what was Balaam's error then? Okay, because the outcome of his attempts to curse Israel, he's never allowed to do that. So how does he become a bad guy? Well, in terms of Deuteronomy. Let's just go to Deuteronomy and pick up some of these thoughts here. You have an explicit charge that Balaam did set out to curse Israel. So Deuteronomy 23:6, the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, for the Lord your God loves you. Again, speaking about Balaam in context there. So apparently Balaam tried and God reversed it. The opinion of Balaam, what did he actually do? It's really the sin that he gets blamed for isn't really part of the Numbers 22 and 20 through 24 story, where he's trying to curse Israel but is prevented from doing so. It actually comes from Numbers 31, 15, and 16. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll just read the two verses. Balaam, after he wasn't able to curse Israel, he advised Balak on what to do in the absence of the cursing in context. So verses 15 and 16 here from Numbers 31. Moses said to them, have you let all the women live? Okay, this is part of the Baal of Peor incident. Behold, these, on Balaam's advice, caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And so the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. So Moses, in this passage, this is Numbers 31. This isn't Numbers 22 through 24 when Balaam's trying to curse the people. And he's not allowed to do that by God. So at some point after that, he advised the enemies of Israel to come up with a different way to get Israel, again, to act treacherously against the Lord. And if you read Numbers 31, it involves, the women from Moab and again, the intermarriage. And one of them brings one of the women, that they're not supposed to marry. And of course, that means, have sexual relations with. It brings them right to the either the door of the tabernacle, or, and some would argue that they actually cross sort of the threshold there, and apparently starts to do it with this woman in the presence of everybody there, just to flaunt it. And then Phinehas, comes over and he impales both of them with a spear, which suggests that one was on top of the other. So this is the incident, and when Moses is commenting on it, all of this happened. This treachery, because of a piece of advice that Balaam gave. So that's what Balaam gets blamed for. So you don't really pick it up in the Balaam story primary. You have to read a little bit further in the book of Numbers to get it. It's kind of interesting, though, that the view of Balaam in the Old Testament isn't entirely negative. Micah 6:5, you read this verse, my people remember what Balak, king of Moab, plotted against you, and how Balaam, son of Beor, responded to him. So, it's kind of a little nod to the fact that, well, Balaam was true to his word. God gave him a message of blessing, and he didn't chicken out. I mean, he blessed the people of Israel right there when Balak was there, and he took some risk there. Balak could have just took his head off or something. So it's acknowledging that Balaam did speak what God gave him to speak, even though he tried, to do what he was hired to do and curse Israel and couldn't. But obviously he gets blamed, for what happens in Numbers 31. Now, beyond that, I'd need to know what the question really means by the geography. This is connected with Moab, so maybe that's the issue. And again, we get the Moabite women in Numbers 31. Moab, of course, was on the other side of the Jordan, the Transjordan. So Is the questioner referring to where it happened, the connection with Moab generally, the order of events? I don't know. I can't tell from the question. I could throw this in. The Israelites, when this stuff happens, are camped on the borders of Moab. And if the reconstructed Deir Allah inscription, it's a famous inscription, it dates to roughly 900 to 600 BC. It's found in the Jordan Valley. If that's reliable, there was El worship in Moab. Okay, and El is one of the words for the God of Israel. So do we have aberrant El worship going on in Moab? Is that a possibility? Well, maybe. If you actually read the Deir Allah inscription, there is mention of El by name. There's mention of the divine council, the council of El. There's also mention of the Shaddaiin, who are called Elohim. This is, again, probably an Aramaic dialect. That would be the word for Elohim in Aramaic. So you have a group of gods in the council, the Shaddaiin, who appear again as part of the council of El, and they decide to send a drought on the land. In this inscription, they do things that are going to hurt the people here. So that term, Shaddaiin, occurs only in this inscription at this site. It might be related to the divine name found in Genesis, El Shaddai. Nobody really knows if that's the case or not. So the picture here, if we want to take this inscription with the biblical material, and Balaam didn't write this inscription, but Balaam is actually mentioned in this inscription, the son of Beor. Maybe there was aberrant El worship going on in Moab, in the Transjordan. The inscription and Balaam himself, according to the biblical text, is familiar with El. Balaam actually uses the divine name, Yahweh. He refers to God as Elohim, and he refers to God as El 4 or 5 times in Numbers 20, 23, and 24. So he also uses the word Shaddai in that section. So maybe, Balaam, he was either a sort of a prophet of God that goes astray, and becomes a prophet for hire. According to this inscription, maybe his theology wasn't quite, what you would consider the orthodox theology of one of the biblical writers. I mean, who knows? It's all guesswork at this point. But Balaam apparently knows of Israel's God. That much is sure. He might even have worshipped him. Did he worship him correctly or not? Who knows? Even people in Canaan proper didn't do that well, all the time, or even most of the time. It's hard to tell either way. But his sin against Israel, again, would seem to indicate he might have had divided loyalty. Was he wholehearted with the Lord, or did he just say, "Hey, I'm gonna speak what the Lord tells me," and then when the Lord showed up, it's like, okay, I better say what this deity says to me, or else I'm going to be in big trouble. Was that it, or was Balaam sort of a faithful but theologically aberrant Yahweh worshiper? We just don't know. We don't really know exactly what the context is. So if that's what's lurking behind the question, again, that gives you a little bit of an introduction to that particular inscription, which is known because it does mention Balaam by name. But beyond that, I can't be more specific, because I'd have to know exactly what the trajectory of the question was.